The way that absolute referencing works is that you won't know you need it until you need it. Now, so far, we've seen formulas and we've been able to copy and paste those formulas because Access works in a relative way. But there will be occasions when the relativeness actually works against you. Let's take the absolute file in your working folder. We have a sheet called Retail Sales, which has a number of sales for 8 shops for 7 days of the week. First thing we need to do is to actually add up all of the sales. So we highlight all of the values and the total rows and column and use our AutoSum key, and it puts the results in. We then need to work out our profit for each of the shops. Now over to the right here, we can see our profit margin is 32.5%. So we simply go into shop 1 equals total for shop 1 multiplied by L2, which contains our profit margin. And when we press return, we've actually made $63,537 physical dollars profit from shop 1. Now we have a formula in place. We want the second cell here to work out for shop 2, for shop 3, shop 4. So we simply take that formula and replicate all the way across to the total column, and that will work out our total profit. For some reason, things don't work. Let's check on shop 3's formula. It has quite happily moved along relatively and now looks at shop 3's total, but unfortunately, the cell looking at the profit margin also moved relatively. So we're now 2 along. So we're looking at N2. Now there is a way around this. We could repeat the profit margin against each of the cells that we will end up in. For example, when we get to the total, although we're looking at the total sum, we're actually looking at T2 to try and find out the profit margin percentage. So I would need to replicate 32.5% all the way from L2 to T2. Or we introduce absoluteness. Now what absoluteness allows you to do is in a formula that you know you're going to copy, so this one here, is actually make a cell, a range, a number of cells absolute, so that when they're copied and pasted, they can't actually change. So I do want the B9 to change. As I replicate this formula across here, I want the B9 to go across and go C9, D9, E9. But what I don't want is I don't want the L2 to change. So what I do is I put a set of dollars, and those dollars go before the column letter and before the row number. And what that does is it fixes the column and the row for that cell reference, so it cannot change regardless of where I paste it. Now, if you're not actually ever going to copy and paste a formula, then you don't need to use dollars. This only applies to formulas that you know you're going to copy and paste, and you need to retain the absolute reference. So having entered my dollars, we can then take that formula and replicate it across to the totals. And you'll see we now have values in, and if we check any one, for example, shop 8, it's looking at the right total because the column in row 9 has been moving as we've been moving, but it's still looking at that L2 because we fixed the reference to it, $L, $2. Now it gets a little bit more complicated if you want to copy a formula and only fix the row reference or only fix the column reference, so that as you copy and paste it, it can't move the row, but it can move the column, or it can't move the column, but it can move the row. And that's done by just changing where the dollars go. So you might say, let's call it L, $2. So the L can change, but the 2 can't. Now in our case, we actually could have got away with $L, 2. So it's always going to look at row 2, but it can't change the column letter. And as we're only copying and pasting it horizontally, that's great because we don't want it to change the column letter. But if we were to go downwards with it, it would allow the 2 to change to a 3, and then to a 4, etc. Now when entering the dollars, there's actually a little keyboard shortcut that will do it for you. If I click into a formula, so let's go back to the original, and it's this one that you would make absolute before you then copy it. Let's remove the dollars and assume that we want to add dollars. So I click into the L2 and then I use F4 on the keyboard. And what you'll see happen is the first time you press F4, it gets a double absoluteness. So it goes $L, $2. I do it again and I just get the row number dollared. So it becomes L, $2. I do it again. I get $L, 2. And then I do it again and I end up with no dollars. So the first case is totally absolute, double dollars, and that's F4 when you're actually in the formula. And then you can replicate across. So if we go into the shopping sheet, we can see this in action again. This time we're going vertically. Here we have a shopping list, number of items, how much of each item have we bought, how much is the unit price of each item, and then a formula to calculate the subtotal. So that's quantity times price. There is then a formula calculating the grand total, which is actually the subtotal plus the tax. And it's the tax that we need to calculate. Our value for tax is over here. There's 20% tax to add on to all our purchases. So we do the first one, which is bread, equals subtotal for the bread multiplied by the tax percentage cell, J5, and return, and we see we have to pay 0.8 dollars in tax. Now we already know that we could copy and paste that down, and we already know, because we're using a fixed cell over here, that if I were to do that, I get zeros all the way down because of the cell reference changing. Again, quite happily, as before, it's changed the reference to the left-hand cell, so it's looking at the new row, but it's also changed the reference to the tax cell, and it's moved down. So however many cells we've moved down, it's moved the reference down. So we do the same, we go back to the first cell, so the first one we've done with the formula. We click anywhere around the J5, and we can use the keyboard shortcut of F4 to place the dollars in. You can just type the dollars if you can't remember the keyboard shortcut, but the keyboard shortcut is quick and easy. So that then becomes $J, $5, and it's that formula with the absolute references that I then copy down. And we see we have correct values then for the tax, because it's changed the row reference on the left to the new row, but it's kept it absolute, so it's always looking at this tax cell. So if the tax changes, so it goes up to 25%, when we press return, that 25% feeds in to all the tax values, which then feeds in to higher grand totals. So that's absolute referencing, the use of dollars in a formula referencing a cell to keep that reference the same when you copy and paste that formula.